Hello and welcome to Exotic Gardening UK Yorkshire Kris Weekly. In this week's episode we'll be looking at the process of hardening off, which is basically bringing your plants from inside to outside without them suffering. So the process of hardening off, like I said in the introduction, is bringing the plants that you've been growing inside, that's either over winter or you've grown from seed or cuttings over winter and spring, and it's bringing them to the outside conditions which are very different to inside conditions. And if you just bring a plant straight out on a nice sunny day in spring when it's nice and warm, you're probably thinking it'll be okay, the plant will just be fine. But what you'll find is a plant will suffer, it'll go into shock. You might curl up the leaves, they might scorch in the sun, they might completely flop or completely collapse over a matter of hours. So you need to harden off your plants for them to be successfully taken outside and to grow away without being checked to growth. So bringing plants outside needs to be done over several days and weeks, and it's slightly different for different plants. So when plants are grown inside for a length of time, they become accustomed to the indoor conditions, which is basically there's no wind, there's no strong light, humidity is probably a bit higher, and in those conditions the actual leaves adapt. So things like the thickness of the leaves change, the amount of pores or stomata in the leaves also change as well, and they get bigger and wider to allow more oxygen and carbon dioxide to diffuse through the leaves, and also for water vapour to go in and out of the leaves as well. And they just become adapted to the indoor conditions, and because there's low light inside, they often get more sort of chlorophyll in, greener, and they really stretch for the sunlight if it's not near a window as well. But when you bring it outside, the light intensity, even in a very shaded area, is much higher than indoors. It's windier outside, you've got gentle air currents, or you could get much windier conditions. You've got rain, you've got snow, possibly, and you've got that strong sunshine as well. And all these extra sort of factors mean that plants can really struggle if you just bring them out. So you need to acclimatise them to outdoor conditions. So even though you're looking at leaves, you think it looks pretty much like a normal leaf inside and outside, those changes on a very small scale will mean that a plant will suffer if you just bring it straight outside. So this goes for every type of plant, but it's more important obviously for the tender plants and plants that have been grown completely indoors and never seen outside at all. But it does go for things that are completely hardy and plants that have been outside previous years. So if you've got, for instance, let's say an orange tree that you've grown outdoor in summer, you bring it indoors, and then a nice warm sunny spring day you just take it outside, that plant will go into shock, even though it's, it's pretty hardy, frost hardy-ish, down to 0 or so. And it can go for things like cacti as well. A cacti that's been indoors all its life or just over winter, you take that out into the blazing sun, yes, normally if it's been outside all the time, it loves the hot sun. If you put it into hot sun, strong sun, when it's just been moved outside, it will scorch and it will burn and it will probably shrivel as well and really not like it. And that is because the actual physiology of the plant, the stem, the leaves has changed while it's been indoors. So that's why we're hardening off. We're trying to protect our plants, we're trying to get them to grow successfully from indoors to outdoors without them being shocked and stopping growth or getting damaged. So how do we do that? Well, basically you've got to sort of do baby steps from the indoor environment to the outdoor environment. So we get our plants, and on a warm day in spring, ideally on a cloudy, overcast day, because you don't want the bright sun, you bring your plants outdoors and put them in a sheltered space and perhaps cover them in fleece or put them slightly under cover. So I'm next to my jungle here. This is a good area to put some of the plants. It's sheltered by the fence, it's got overhead canopy as well, so the strong sunlight won't hit it in the strongest hours of the sun in the midday, and it's a little bit more sheltered there. But putting it against a house wall, by a shed, covering it with fleece is a good first step for a few hours on a nice cloudy, overcast but warm day, just to get that slight acclimatization for the plants. And in fact, before that, if you've got plants indoors, is to do things like open windows, get some airflow in the house or in the conservatory or the greenhouse, get that airflow going through, so at least the movement on those leaves of the plants you're going to bring out, it will get used to that movement rather than being in a still atmosphere, and also reduce temperatures as well. So if you've gone from a heated greenhouse, you need to start reducing the heat, turn off the heat at night when you get past obviously the frost-free nights, and just get that plant ready for being in a cooler environment. So once you've done that, you bring it outside, get it in a sheltered spot, and then just leave it out for that day and then bring it in at night. And you do this for quite a few days or even a couple of weeks, where you bring it out and then at night bring it back in. It's a bit of a palaver, but it's worth it to stop the check on obviously the most precious plants. And plants you've had a long time, or plants that grow very slowly, are the plants you've got to be the most careful of in many ways, because if a slow growing plant does get damaged by not being hard enough and its leaves get scorched, it can take a long time to replace those leaves. Whereas a fast growing plant, yes, you might get scorched, but they'll quickly grow back. So you've got to be more careful really with the slower growing plants. So after a few days of bringing it in and out, you can leave it out overnight when you've got warm nights. It depends on the type of plant, but definitely frost free, and definitely really above 5 degrees at night, just to get that acclimatization process carried on without the check in growth. So you can leave it out, covered over with fleece, in a sheltered spot, and then see how it looks, and then do that for another few more days. And then it's time to take off the fleece, not protect it at night, give it extra acclimatization, and then we move on to the stage of getting the plants and putting them into more sunlight and more exposed positions if they're going to be planted in a bit more exposed positions. And we do this whole process from the first day you take it out of your greenhouse or conservatory or house to the outdoors. This can take 2, possibly 3 weeks. Some plants you can do it much quicker, over a week, if they're really fast growing plants that don't matter if they get a little bit of dieback. But ideally the plants that are slow growing, or you really want to take care of the most, do this over 2 or 3 weeks. Now with big heavy plants, this can be a bit of a pain, because you don't want to be getting a big heavy plant in and out and in and out. So you can mitigate this by obviously putting big plants on wheels, or cheating a little bit by putting those close to the front of the greenhouse with the doors fully open all day, so you've got that shelter and you've got a bit of a halfway house literally from being indoors and outdoors. But for the most part, most plants, you might have trays of bedding plants, you might have your things like colocasias, your dahlias and cannas, you might have started indoors and you want to bring them outdoors. These really tender leaf plants, especially at this time of year, in spring before they've been outside, they will be hurt by just a very cold night or really strong sun. So those are the plants you've got to take the most care of. One thing that's great to have, but most people don't have because of the space, is a cold frame. A cold frame is a fantastic halfway house between indoors and outdoors. We can control the amount of light getting in by opening and closing the lid, the amount of ventilation it gets, and obviously it's a lot cooler in there as well, but not too cold for most plants. So a cold frame is an excellent thing to have if you've got space. But the most important thing is not to rush the process. It's so easy to be so keen, enthusiastic and eager in spring to get all your bedding plants out, get all those plants that are being overwintered inside for months and months. You just want to get them out, get them fresh air, and then just plant them out on one big day. Well, if you do that, unfortunately, a lot of those plants will suffer. Now I'll talk about a few plants specifically because people have asked for certain plants. So things like ricinus, which you grow from seed, which you normally sow sort of April time, These are obviously fleshy leaf plants, and they'll probably have 5-6 leaves before you plant them out. And if you just take them from the indoors to the outdoors, put them in the sun, they'll just flop over. Literally, bit of wind, they'll flop over because they need to get accustomed to being outside. So these are the plants, along with other big seedlings, that you need to put in a sheltered space, even though you think that's sort of counterproductive that you're going to put it in shade, because eventually it's going to go into full sun. So make sure you look after those tender seedlings of things like ricinus. Things like onset bananas, you can get away with onset bananas, taking them out without too much of an issue, because yes, they are very fast growing. They grow a huge big leaf within a week or so, each leaf. And if you've had them growing inside, no matter what you do, those first few leaves have been indoors and they're going to be floppy, and when you bring them outdoors, they're not going to have much acclimatization. And even if you try to put them in shelter, then the first leaves of the year do shrivel and don't do brilliantly. They quickly get replaced by new fresh leaves that you bring out, that grow when you've brought them outside. So with onset bananas, you can sort of take them out and bring them into shelter, and probably don't take 2 or 3 weeks. You can do that over a week, simply because you might lose those first leaves, but they'll quickly be replaced. So you can sort of cheat a little bit with onset bananas. But anything with a really sort of thin stem or fleshy stem that might literally keel over, those are the plants you need to be more careful of. Things like, I mentioned cacti and other succulent plants, if they've got obviously a green stem like a cacti that's always green, it'll stay like that, and you put that into strong sun and that scorches, you're stuck with that damage pretty much forever. So those plants that are slow growing like that, you need to put, I know it's a cacti, but put those into shade and shelter before you do the baby steps to being into full exposure and full sun. Things like aeoniums, I sometimes get away with, because the leaves on aeoniums, they have hundreds of leaves and they're replaced really quickly. So they can be brought out, still harden them off over a week or so, but you probably don't need 2 or 3 weeks, because you might get a bit of damage on some of the leaves, but they are pretty much quickly replaced. As soon as the weather's nice and warm, which is when you're putting out your plants to harden off anyway, then it'll be into active growth straight away, and any damage will be quickly replaced by new leaves. So the main thing I'll say to you is, please don't just get your plants that you've looked after all winter, bring them out into the strong sun and leave them there, because unfortunately they'll be damaged. So baby steps, put them into shelter, put fleece over them for a week or so, take the fleece off, give them extra ventilation, keep them well watered obviously as well, and if there's any frost on the horizon, you're going to have to bring them in for most part for the tender plants. You do not want seedlings or bedding plants to get frosted at this stage. Hardier plants, obviously, they can cope with the frost as long as they're protected and they're going through the hardening off process. So that is hardening off in a nutshell. It's a process which most people can overlook in their eagerness to get planted out. It's really important that you harden off your plants. Right, thank you for watching this edition of Exotic Gardening UK. Join me next week, we'll be doing more in the garden.